Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today we're doing a paint with me, painting step-by-step tutorial. This painting here, this is of Lake Moraine in Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. It's probably one of the most famous mountain lakes in Canada, as you see it on tons of postcards, travel websites. So I thought it would be fun to do this one. My wife and I just had the chance to go there this past weekend, and so I took some photos, and this painting's done off of one of those photos that I'll post below so that you can use it as well if you'd like to follow along with this painting. The canvas I used here is a 10 by 10 square canvas, as you can see. You can use larger squares or smaller squares. You'll just have to kind of take that into consideration when you're going through the painting. So I'll go through the materials I used, the paintbrushes I used. Throughout the video I talk about the process and the mixing and everything like that. I hope afterwards, if you do this, that you can take some pictures of it and post them in the comments so I can see them and share them on my own social media if you'd like. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so before we get started, I always like to say for nature paintings that there's no mistakes. Nature isn't perfect. That means our nature paintings aren't going to be perfect. As we are trying to paint a scene, we are going to want to try to make it look pretty similar to what it is, but if one of your mountain ridges is bigger or smaller, that's fine. Each painting is unique, and that's the fun of it. So before I get any paint out, you can see here I have some dots. Those are just little guidelines as to where the peaks of the mountains are, and then on the bottom here we have 3 more, and those are where the lake comes in and the back of the lake. And yeah, for those of you who've been to Banff and have been to Lake Moraine, you know how pretty it is. The water, the color is a beautiful turquoise blue, and the ridges that come above it are pretty breathtaking. So I hope that we can do it justice, and I hope that you enjoy this little tutorial. So we'll get started with some blue. We're going to start with the sky. We're going to start with the sky and work our way down. So we're going to start with this Pacific blue. It's pretty similar to a cobalt blue if you're working with more professional paints. But for this tutorial I wanted to really use cheaper paints that are more accessible to everybody. We're going to add a little bit of sky blue in there as well. You could really just use white with the other blue and it would lighten it up, but since I have it, we're going to use some of this lighter blue as well. Just putting it on the palette over here. And we're going to start with more of just a broad square brush, just so we can quickly block in the sky up there. Alright, so I have some of that darker blue. We're just going to start spreading it. You don't need to worry much about your brush strokes if they're this or that way. I'm really just covering canvas at this point. Alright. Scrubbing it on there, getting it in. This canvas as well was also bought at the dollar store. I didn't want to use expensive canvas. I wanted you to see how it would turn out on one of the cheaper canvases. So I've got a little bit ways down here, just a little bit more. Now I'm just going to get some of that lighter blue and then work from there. And you can see it is quite different, but what you can do is you can start below, and then if you just work your way back up into it, into the darker blue, then it creates that nice, clean gradient or flow. I'm going to do that on each side here. Work my way back up a little bit. And even if you get a little bit up above like I did there, all it really does is make it look like clouds. So if you've ever really noticed in nature, the closer that the sky will get to the horizon, the lighter it gets. So that's why we're using this lighter blue at the bottom here. And I don't know if you can see it, but my pencil mark is just showing through, which is good. So I'm not losing that reference point. Alright, so there's our sky. Pretty simple, just darker blue moving down to lighter blue. So now we're going to move on to the mountains, as that's our next step. I'm just going to rinse off my brush here. I just have a mason jar of water. That's what I like to use, because then it has a lid on it and you don't accidentally drink it. Alright, so that's rinsed off. So now for the mountains, we're going to work with the darker part in the background first, and then work our way towards the light highlights. And so if you've kind of looked at mountains before, you can see that there's a kind of a dark purple as the background color. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some of this red, and if you just used this is called holiday red, but if you use like a cadmium red medium, that's pretty similar. And then we're going to continue to use some of this Pacific blue, or similar to cobalt blue, to make our purple. And then we're going to add some black. You could use, this is just called black. If you're using more professional paints, there's Mars black or lamp black, ivory black. Any of those will work. So I'm just putting some red on my palette. I used up most of that darker blue, so we're just going to add a bit more onto here. Add a little bit of black. Be careful with black because it is very powerful. I mean, a little goes a long way. So I would recommend adding little bits first until you get the color that you want. I'm just going to use a palette knife here to mix it up. This one's been used quite a bit, as you can see, and they're good for mixing. You're going to want to mix a decent amount because we do have to fill in quite a bit of this canvas for the mountain. Alright, so that's kind of the color we have so far. I'm just going to make it a tad bit darker, just add a little bit more black to that. And then we're going to be using that same brush, the same one to block it in, just because it is a big space to block in. If you did wash it, I just have a little rag here. I would recommend drying it off, because sometimes water won't be your friend. Alright, so I'm going to get some of that. It's kind of a dark purple, and we're just going to block in where our mountains would be. You can really start anywhere. What I'm going to do, I'm going to start on the top left here. I'm going to go right to my mark there. I'm going to come up, come up. Bring it up just a little bit and back down. We're going to work out those details on the top of the mountain there. Once we get the full thing locked in here. So at Lake Moraine, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 separate peaks. And so each of them kind of have their own flow to it, down to the, almost down to the lake. And so we want to create that similar effect. And that's why I'm kind of painting it down like that just for now. Alright, so there's kind of the basis of your mountain peaks. Alright, so I'm going to take one of these smaller brushes. You could, this one, just to work out the details of the top of the peak. So I'm still going to use that dark purple that I have here. And we're going to start up in here. Alright, and there's the basis for our mountains. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take some white. I just have white. If you have more expensive stuff, it's called titanium white. And I'll teach you how Bob Ross likes to do these. He likes to do the base similar to this with the dark in the back, and then add some of the bright highlights, and then work with the medium highlights afterwards. So I just have white. I'm using the smaller brush again, and we're just going to add some snow to here. And since I didn't wash my brush off, which I did on purpose, it's not going to be a pure white, it's going to be a light purple. And that kind of gives us automatically that medium tone. And if you have happen to get some nice white like I just did right there, that's great. Alright, so that's all we're going to add for the white to begin with. Now we're going to mix some of that white with the purple that we have. And these are going to act as some of those medium highlights throughout. And I'm just going to add some, kind of working with the mountain as we go. So we're just so this mountain's coming down this way. They're all kind of flowing this way, and so that's how we want our strokes to kind of work down towards. The reason I'm leaving a lot of this blank is because there is another little part in the foreground that's going to cover most of this. And so since most of it will be covered in the end, there's no use in doing another detail over it. Alright, so inside of the rock as well of the ridges over Lake Moraine here, there's a lot of brownish color, so we're going to take some of this. It's called espresso. You can also use burnt umber. Even burnt sienna would be okay. So we're going to take some of that, put it on our palette here. I'm going to mix that in with a little bit of white and a little bit of black, just to really dull the color there to start. And throughout the mountain ridge here, there's highlights of brown, so we're just going to add in some of these highlights here. So we're going to throw in some kind of right in the middle here. For that back one, added a little bit more of white to the mixture. And we're just going to dab some brown into there. Alright, so now over top of some of that kind of faded brown, I mixed a little bit of white and I actually put a dab of red in, and we're just going to go over some of these, and that'll add a little bit more depth to some of these rocks in here. Alright, that's good for now with that. So now I'm actually going to wash my brush out. Wash it out, get that brown out of there. Dry it off as best you can. And then I'm going to take some more just pure white again, and we're going to come back in, especially at the top here. Wherever you have that light purple, that's always a really good spot to be adding a little bit of this more pure white over top, because that light purple is more of the shadows of the snow. Alright, I think we're going to leave it like that for now. And then we'll probably come back to the snow in just a minute here and touch it up. But at the bottoms of the mountains here, there's a lot of erosion buildup, and so it's very, very rocky, it's very shaly. And so to do that effect, we're going to use some light brown. This one's called Cashmere Tan. And that's going to kind of be coming up the mountains into this brown area, and then we'll go from there. I'm just going to use the same brush. I've only had white in it for now, so you don't even have to wash it off. I'm going to add a little bit of white to this light brown, because the light brown by itself is just a little bit too potent, saturated. I added just a dab of black to it as well. And this is going to come down pretty much to the lake, and we're going to be working with it on this side as well. So we're going to work this in here. As you get further up into it, I'm going to dab it in. But as I come down, it is quite thick, and so you can actually kind of brush it in a little bit too. So I'm adding a bit more white to it, and we're just going to kind of dab in some lighter, just a lighter shade of this in the direction that it would be flowing or falling, however you want to say it. this one even has some darker highlights. So we're going to take a little bit of that darker brown, dab it on your palette first, then we're just going to dab a little bit into here. Could even work a little bit in on this first one here. Alright, we're going to take a quick step away from that. We're going to work in with this area here. There's a little cliff with some trees on top right here. And the cliff is very brown. Not pure brown, obviously. So that would be too lucky. So we're going to take some of the darker brown that I had in there. We're going to mix it with some black. And we're going to dab it up into here. And it's going to come up all the way up to there. This is mainly going to be trees in here. That's why we're not worrying too much about that. I'm going to get some of that lighter brown in there. Dab in the necessary highlights. Once we add some trees into that, we'll be just fine. Alright, so the snow doesn't stop right there. The snow does continue down into the rocky area. So I'm going to rinse this brush off again. Dry it off. Get some pure white and use it and dab it down. Alright, so now we're going to start into the lake. Skip the forest for now and come back to that, but by getting the lake in, then when we work the shoreline down, it'll be a better blend and a better flow to it. So for the lake, if you've ever been to this lake, you know how turquoisey blue it is. So we have some turquoise, and I'm going to use some of this Pacific blue again as well, and locking it in, we're going to use our bigger flat brush again, and we might use this one as well, we'll see. Alright, so I'm going to put some turquoise onto my palette here. And some more blue, because I'm out of blue. Alright, so the further back I go into the lake, the darker it's going to get. And the closer I get, the lighter it's going to be. So I'm going to start with some of this blue. I'm actually going to leave the canvas just so it's on the edge of this. I'm instantly going to add to it. And since this is a lake, we are going to make sure that we do horizontal brush strokes as waves and stuff in the lake. Little white caps. If it's windy, they will be horizontal. I'm going to grab a little bit of white. Doing that on the palette. bit of white to add into this here. A bit more turquoise. Let's see what that gives us. Alright, that's all we're going to do for now on the lake. We just filled it in. We'll go back afterwards and add a little bit of white in along the shoreline to add where the water is kind of crashing up against the shoreline, or rolling up more. Like the waves aren't huge on this lake, as you can imagine. Alright, so I'm going to wash that brush off. And dry it off. So now we're going to go back in and get these trees in. So for the trees, I have this pine green. If you're mixing green, use yellow and blue. You can use the cobalt blue or the Pacific blue we've been using, and a yellow. So I'm going to add some of that in here to my palette. So for the first layer of trees, actually before we get into that, for these trees that are far back, I'm going to be using this brush because it is slender on top there. We want a nice skinny one because then we can just kind of dab in how trees would look. But just like we did with the mountain, we're going to start with the darker color first. So we're going to start with the dark green. So with that pine green, I'm going to grab some black, make a nice dark green. It almost looks black. It probably looks black on the camera there. And then having this vertical, I'm just going to be dabbing this down, and here the trees go right to the water. And then since this is the end of the lake, that means that your trees are the furthest away. We're going to switch it and go horizontal. And for this white part right here, I'm actually just pretty much going to fill it in with this dark green. And when we add the highlights over top, that's going to add some more of the depth and texture, but we don't really want white showing through. And that's just going to make it look more thick in the end here. And then with just taking that pure pine green, just not the mixed stuff, I'm just going to add a little bit into here. Because then that kind of just looks more like the grass that has formed through the rocks. Alright, so now with the pure pine green, I'm going to go back over top of these. So remember, these ones were vertical over here, so we're going to keep our paintbrush vertical. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a little bit of this yellow, just bright yellow. You could use a cadmium yellow, cadmium-free yellow. You could use a medium yellow. I'm going to get a little bit of this yellow on my palette. I'm going to mix a little bit of that yellow with my dark green, just the regular, like the pine green. And those are going to be the lighter highlights. The reason I'm not using white is because I feel like white would mute the green too much, but by adding a yellow to it, it lightens it up, but it keeps that color value to it. So we're going to add this into the tops of the trees here. All right, up front right in here, I'm creating a little inlet. And so, since it is closer, it is going to be lighter colors, and they will be taller. So here's our trees. I'm going to add a little bit of blue on my brush there. Add some dark highlights as well. And then we need some really light highlights that we'll get in a minute here once I kind of build these up a bit. Alright, so I added more yellow to it. Alright. From there, we're going to touch up this shoreline all the way around, and then if you've ever been to Lake Moraine, you'll know that the best viewpoint is walking up. There's a trail right by the parking lot that takes you up to this big rock pile, and from on top, this is where you can see the most panoramic view of the lake. But there are a lot of pine trees in the view as well, right up front, and so we're going to add a few little pine trees right in here. We're going to add one large one on this side, a little small one here, and probably one over here in front of the lake that are close to you, and that'll kind of give it some more depth and just be true to what the actual view of the lake looks like. So for the shore, I'm going to grab a little bit more of that light brown, mix it with a little bit of white, and I just want to touch up the base of these trees here. Just give it a slight brown to it there. And then I just took some turquoise, some of that darker green, a little bit of black, and a little bit of blue. And I'm just going to use that kind of along the other side of this shoreline here, touching the brown. But then to blend it in, I'm just going to take some straight turquoise and straight blue and just work it in sideways a little bit here. Straight turquoise and straight blue. Still using that same one. We're going to take some white, just a hint of turquoise, mainly white, and along the back shoreline here we're just gonna kind of a little, it's almost like a slight dab and drag. So from there you really could stop if you wanted to. You have your lake, you have your trees, mountains. You could give it a little signature right here. But we're going to continue on a little bit more, and we're going to add those pine trees into the front. We're going to add one here, smaller one here, and then one about right here into it. So for that pine tree, we're going to use this, where is it? This brown, equivalent to like a burnt umber. Raw umber as well would work. I still do have a little bit of that on my palette. What we're going to do is we're going to continue using this brush. I'm going to take some black and mix it with that just to make it a little bit darker. That black, so I'm just adding some more black onto my palette. Alright, so we have a nice dark brown now. Really dark brown. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add in the trunk of the tree first. So we're going to start right, it's going to go right to the top. This one. Start right up there. When I'm working with something like this and I'm trying to get in a decently straight edge, what I'll do is I'll just flip it. And then it makes it easier to work on the other side. So now that we have the dark background of it again, we're going to add in some lighter brown to it. So I just took some brown, still is mixed a little bit with some of the black in there. And just like we've been doing almost everywhere else in this painting, we're going to do some dabbing. All the way up. It might not look like much of a change yet, but that's okay. It's the layers that will help us. So now I'm getting more just pure brown. Dabbing that up. I'm going to mix in a little bit of white with that and a little bit of black just to give it a little bit more of a faded look, as that's what we're going for here. Alright, and there's our stump. So we're going to rinse this brush off. Dry it off. Now for the branches and needles, kind of goes back to what we were doing here. So we get some dark green to start, and I'm actually going to start at the top. And with pine trees, most of them, as you know, they start smaller and get a little bit wider as you work down. Alright, so that's our base layer. You can always go back and add more later if we need. From there, we're going to grab more of the pure pine green. I added just a little bit of yellow to this as well. Alright, once that layer's in, then I'm going to do the same like I did over here. I'm going to add some yellow into that. And then we're going to go back and do that same thing. And hopefully you can see how these different layers are really creating the depth of the pine tree. Alright, I still have quite a bit of dark on my brush, so I'm just going to rinse that dark off. And dry it off. Because now what I want to do is get more of that yellow. I need to put a little bit more of this pine green onto the palette. So yellow and the pine green. Mix some of that. And we're going to do another layer. Alright, I think we're going to leave this one as is for now. We're going to do another small tree, pretty close to it, right in here, and then one little one right over here. So what we could have done is we could have done all the darks first, all the browns, you know, worked our way with each of them all the way through. So I think that's what we're going to try to do with these last two, so I can show you how to do that. Alright, so this one, we're going to bring it in. Let's get the right color here. Getting that dark brown. Just gonna put that in right there. Since it's so small, I'm just gonna leave it like that. And this other one, we're gonna bring in about right here. And I'm gonna bring it up so it even covers a little bit. Put more paint on the brush. Alright, now as before, get some lighter brown in there. Alright, that's all we're going to do for the for these ones. Now we're just going to get some of that darker green. And since we are really working right at the top of this tree, unlike that one where it kept on going up, we're going to have to make sure that we start small at the top. Whereas you don't want it super wide. Then as you get further down, and this one's going to go right off the bottom too. So something simple like that. Same with this one. Nothing crazy. That one's going to go right off the bottom too. Working your way back up a little bit. Alright, then we'll grab just like the pure pine green, and we'll dab some of this in here. Same with this one. And we're going to mix in some of that yellow with it. Make it a bit lighter. And then go back and do the same thing. And then some of the really light stuff. Dabbing that in too. Alright, so this is the time now where if you have any little highlights that you want to touch up in the trees or in the further back trees in the lake and the mountains and the snow, now's the time to do it. If you want to sign it, that leaves you a nice little spot right in the front here to sign it. I would recommend using one of the dark greens or the browns to sign it. And then the last thing that leaves us to do is to cover up these sides. And I always like to use a color from the painting to paint around the edges of the canvas. And so I'm actually just going to use a dark green to fill that in. Alright, since acrylic paint dries really quick, that top's already dry. So I'm just going to set it down. And there you go. So I hope you enjoyed this painting tutorial today. I hope that if you did do it, that you'll post in the comments below your success, your results, so that I can see them and I can share them. I always love seeing everybody's different ways of portraying different things with these nature tutorials. And the next tutorial that we'll be doing will be of Lake Louise, which is very close to Lake Moraine. So I hope that you subscribe so you won't miss out on that one. And I hope to see you next time here on Brian Sloan Artist.